Welcome to Marney Reid Presents Connect to Develop, where we provide insight from healthcare leaders on the hottest topics and trends. I'm really excited about not only this topic, but the guest for the first episode in Season 6. I'd like to introduce you to an incredible leader and healthcare executive, Kate Lee Smith, who will be sharing advice on the art of public speaking and how to improve your podium presence. Kate Lee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Barney, thank you so much for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this topic that can feel a little daunting to some and be able to share some practical tips and tricks to help anyone build confidence and feel more empowered when it comes to developing a podium presence and public speaking.
Beautiful. And I understand the irony of me doing a podcast on the art of public speaking, as I have an extremely hoarse voice from coming back from a sinus infection. So viewers out there, here's a tip. Lots of honey, lemon, and turmeric tea if you have a voice like this and you're about to go up on stage. Okay, Kate Lee, what are the top things that someone should think about when they're about to give a talk and they're the main speaker or even the moderator for a panel when it comes to dress code and appearance?
I think that's a great place to start. I'm a big believer that your style is an extension of your personality. And if you're confident in what you're wearing and how you look the day of an event, that's going to come through in your posture, voice, and just overall presence. So, at a high level, anytime you're getting ready to go into a speaking situation, it's important to kind of know the two different dress codes that might exist. Now, when it comes to dress codes, you're going to hear it 1,000 different ways. And this is something that is definitely a little controversial and opinion based. So I'm going to share, obviously, my perspective. And you're either going to land probably in two categories, either business professional or business casual. I think everyone knows business professional. That's going to be your traditional suit, or for women, blouse, or with a skirt or pantsuit. And then business casual. For men, that's a collared shirt with or without a blazer, chinos, slacks. And for women, that's a blouse or dress pants or skirt with slightly less formal casual flats or heels. So as you think about those two categories, it's always important to try to then figure out, okay, which one do I land in? And a few things I always recommend is first, ask whoever invited you what other speakers are wearing. It's very normal to just be able to ask that question. And then I always like to research old photos if you're speaking at a conference and try to get an idea of what others were wearing at that event. And if you're ever unsure and can't figure out the dress code, I would say it's always safer to be overdressed rather than underdressed.
Can't agree more on that last part, which is why I've jokingly said I'm going to wear a ball gown on occasion when people do things like snappy casual is the dress code, or something like that. Whatever snappy casual means. So does it depend on the industry you're in and then the audience you're presenting to?
Absolutely. Your choice of attire should align with the expectations of both your industry and the specific audience you're addressing. So as we think about healthcare, for instance, a high percentage of the time, your goal when you're going up to speak is establishing credibility. And one of the things that can help you do that is your outfit and overall appearance. It has the ability to support with that goal of building credibility or distract from it. Another good rule of thumb is the larger the audience, the more polished your appearance should be. So that goes for something like a larger industry meeting or national conference. Business formal is typically always going to be the safer choice. You can obviously still show some personality while still maintaining that elevated look. The other thing to consider when it comes to audiences and the way that we dress is that business casual can be a great tool if you're going into a meeting where your goal is creating a collaborative conversation with your audience. Sometimes having a little bit more of a business casual attire can make you look more approachable. And I'll give you an example. For the Foundation for Physician Advancement events that you and I get to be a part of, we purposefully ask the faculty and attendees to dress in more business casual. And we do that on purpose because one of the goals of that meeting is we want to have authentic and collaborative conversations. And when our faculty are able to dress in a slightly less formal manner, it makes them feel more approachable and it makes others feel comfortable and engaging in conversations with them. The other final piece that I would recommend is if you're in an environment where you're meeting with senior leaders or executives, I would say business formal attire is going to be able to highlight your expertise and authority. So, and this may just be personal preference, but for me, even if the senior leaders or executives might be dressed a little bit slightly more casual, if you've been selected as the speaker and you're going into that environment, I always want to have a little bit more elevated and formal attire to support in that meeting.
I love that. Any specific colors to avoid or to embrace?
Ooh, I'll bucket this out into men and women for just a second. So, for men, a dark navy or gray suit, it's always going to be timeless. It's always going to look great on stage. And when in doubt, white starched pocket square always is a great way to elevate your look. But the key to think about for men is patterns. You really need to be thoughtful, especially when it comes to shirts or ties, and select if you love patterns, that's fine, but make sure that it's something a little more muted, as sometimes patterns, especially under bright lights, can be distracting and you never want your attire to take away from what you're saying on stage. The other thing to keep in mind with patterns, especially if your presentation is being recorded or live streamed on camera, I would stay away from patterns like stripes or checks, as under harsh light, and I'm probably going to botch the way you pronounce it, but it can cause the moire effect where the pattern ends up looking wavy on video. And I'm sure people have seen this before. So that's just a call out, especially for men around patterns. But for women, I love color, and I think a pop of color can really help you stand out as a speaker, tends to make you a little more memorable, and it's also just a great way to show some personality. So for me, I know that red and purple tend to be great colors, so I tend to gravitate towards selecting those options. But you really need to think about what colors work well on your skin tone. And if you don't know, ask your friends or family. They will be able to tell you what colors just tend to look best and can work to highlight your overall appearance. And I'll give a quick example on how you can use color to show some personality. I love animal print. And so I'm sure at this point you're thinking animal print is not professional. I don't know where she's going with this. And it can be. It absolutely can be too bold for a formal setting sometimes. But I found a muted pink blazer that has a folded cuff with some silk animal print pattern on it. Again, just a touch of animal print, not going wild. And then paired it with black pants, and it really allowed me to stay formal. Again, I had the blazer and black pants on, but also allowed me to just show some personality and some uniqueness that I love to have when I'm invited to either moderate a panel or speak.
Okay, so let's stick on the male versus female version. And I'm glad that this is not a conversation we're having with HR, but let's be honest. It really does matter on your outfit, your color, even down to lipstick, I would say, in terms of, male, female. And can we also talk about tenure? Because I got into healthcare, goodness gracious, I'm dating myself, 16, 17 years ago, and I dumbed it down as much as possible for my looks. I had zero makeup. I had just a pair of simple studded earrings in. I never wore any jewelry except for a watch to let people know I was paying attention, to time. I wore scrubs everywhere unless it was a dinner function. And then I wore a very sedate, pinstripe suit to start with. And then about 3 to 4 years ago, when I had built credibility to what you said earlier, I had built a reputation, I started to try red lipstick to see what would happen. And, in your 40s, you've been around for a while, you've got a great brand, you can do that. But can you walk us through, starting with female, things to consider? And can you kind of tranche out where in your career with that industry you are?
Absolutely. And I'll say I love makeup, but the goal with makeup is simply to enhance your features, and you don't need a ton of heavy makeup to be stage ready. So I love what you said there, which was you went with maybe a little bit more a pared back classic look. And as you have built your credibility throughout your career, you allowed more of your personal style to start to come out, and you started to explore different ways to use that, whether that's with makeup or accessories. And I think there's a few staple things, especially if you are getting ready to go into an environment where you're speaking on stage. I would recommend using a setting powder. Even if you're someone that doesn't do a lot of makeup, a setting powder will help dry up any sweat that you have from nerves and help make you less shiny on stage. And I say this for your female listeners, but honestly, it works for your male listeners as well. And then I also love waterproof mascara to prevent smudging. Again, you could be sweating if you're on stage, totally normal, but that can also be a great tip just to make sure that everything's staying fresh. The other piece that I'll touch on is blush or bronzer. Again, if you're under harsh lighting, it can really wash you out and you want to look alive and energized. So using a blush or bronzer and going a little bit heavier on your application for a speaking environment can be the right call to help you look a little more awake, as well as selecting a really good natural lip color. And so just a few of those elements work regardless of what industry you're in or where you are in your career. And I would say staying away from really bold eyeshadow, heavy winged eyeliner, or even bright pink or red lipstick is the right call, whether you're earlier in your career or you're at a large speaking event. You, again, want your makeup to enhance your features. You don't want it to be distracting. But as you go throughout your career, I do think if you are somebody that red lipstick is a signature look, absolutely, especially if you know the audience, right? If you know that it's an audience that's going to be fine with you maybe playing up some lipstick or wearing a little bit more of a bolder animal print, awesome. But if you're going into a really formal setting, for instance, maybe you're going in to speak to a healthcare meeting and you're female and it's all male colleagues and everybody's in suits, that may not be the right time to try our heavy winged eyeliner and bright pink lipstick. You may just want to tone that down and maybe use other elements like a pop of color in your outfit to show that personality. And Marnie, I love red lipstick and I know you do as well. And if that's your signature, the only thing that I would tack on when it comes to lipsticks is make sure before you're going up to speak, whether it's you checking or having a friend, make sure the red lipstick is not on your teeth. That almost happened to me, and that is not a great way to start out any conversation. For men, they have it a little bit easier when it comes to things like hairstyles, for instance, as long as their hair is neatly combed. I will say a couple of years ago, I was a part of an interview where someone, for whatever reason, just decided that using a comb that day wasn't something they were going to do. So I'm saying it because it's happened before. Neatly combed hair and either clean shaven or neatly trimmed facial hair is just puts them in a really great place. And the other piece that I'll touch on that we didn't directly talk about is nails. And I know this seems maybe a little bit random, but it applies to both men and women. And I think it's subtle, but definitely if you're at an event where you're going to be shaking a lot of hands or you're in close contact with others, I would make sure that I'm taking the time to look at my nails, make sure they're trimmed in appropriate length, everything looks really tidy. You don't have to go get your nails done. I am somebody that enjoys that. So a neutral color, a French manicure always looks timeless. But that's just a little bit of a pro tip for me, is making sure that your nails look good, because it is something that may stick out if you're in conversation or, again, shaking a lot of hands.
It's funny the things that certain executives notice. I had one executive back when I was at a large med tech company that noticed everyone's shoes and if they were scuffed or if they were polished or, what height the shoes that the women were wearing or if they were closed toed. And then to your point you just made, I had another person that every time they shook someone's hands, they looked closely at their fingernails because since oftentimes the client has your handshake first, if you have unkept nails or dirt or if you have bright colors or things like that, that was, a big buzz for them. Can we talk
Yeah.
about for women especially, if you don't know, because this happened to me actually, I didn't realize they were going to put us in those high chairs. I'd worn a dress and I'd specifically asked for handheld mics, not lapels. And as soon as I got there, I was told, sorry, we couldn't get the handheld mics. We have a lapel. So I had a blazer on with a dress, no pockets. And so I sat there with my legs clenched as tightly closed as I possibly could. Luckily, it actually was not on a dais because that might have, been even worse. So can you talk about having the listeners not make that same mistake?
Absolutely. And that's something that I've also experienced. I hate the high stool situation. I think it's really hard to figure out how you position yourself and look confident when you're sitting on those. So, yeah, especially for your female audience, this is where if you can ask whoever has invited you to speak in advance, great. But to Marnie's point, they may even have some last minute changes. So if you are someone that loves skirts or dresses, I would be really thoughtful first about the length of your skirt or dress. I tend to recommend going right above the knee, since inevitably when you get on stage, things are just going to look a little bit shorter in general. But the other piece is, if you don't know, especially if you're moderating a panel, whether it's seated or standing, I would always play it safe and either select pants, or if pants are not something that you feel you're most confident in, select a loose fitting skirt or dress that looks flattering while seated. Now, that's the key, because sometimes those more fitted dresses, you look fantastic in standing, but they're not necessarily comfortable or flattering if you're seated. So the other piece to consider is, and I always do this, but maybe optional, if you're going to wear a dress or skirt, I always tend to wear a liner short underneath, especially if you're going to go on stage. That's just a safety net in the back of my mind. But a pro tip is, whatever outfit you pick, make sure that you practice sitting in it, how you're going to cross your legs to help prevent any wardrobe malfunctions. And honestly, just make sure you're comfortable in what you're wearing. And then one other piece, and I'll touch on the lapel mic element because that's really important. I will say, as you're thinking about outside of skirt or dress, accessories plays a big component when it comes to microphones. So I actually presented at a conference a few years ago, and my blazer had zippers on it that stopped at the end of the sleeve. And during the presentation, that zipper kept hitting as I went to advance the slides, and the microphone was actually picking up that clinking noise. And so while it wasn't necessarily distracting as much for my audience, or I hope not, it was crazy distracting for me. And especially if you're thinking about bracelets or long earrings for a lapel mic, I would be really thoughtful about accessories and how they can potentially interact with microphones, and specifically lapel mics. So if you're not familiar with a lapel mic, they're going to clip onto your collar, and they're usually going to have a decently heavy mic pack. And if you're wearing a dress without a blazer, or it doesn't have a belt, there's nowhere to put that clip-on pack. So if you're not sure about the mic situation, I would be really thoughtful about selecting an outfit that's maybe a skirt or a dress with a belt or a blazer with a pocket. Just be thinking about where that mic pack could go. And then also arrive early for mic check if possible, Because what you don't want to have happen is you're getting ready to speak, you're a little nervous, even though I'm sure you're very prepared. You don't want those nerves to get escalated because you're fiddling with the mics and it's not going well and you're about to go on stage. So I would also just get there early to make sure that you know how you're going to be on stage, whether that's standing or seated, and that you're doing your mic check early so that you feel really confident going into that presentation and that's not something that's elevating your anxiety.
I have to say, I love the term elevating your look, that kind of stuff that you've used when mentioning pocket squares. Can you talk about cue cards? When is it appropriate to use cue cards both as a moderator or if you are a panelist and you've gotten the questions in advance, but you want to kind of keep track of your thoughts? And what are some best practices around that?
I love using a cue card personally. You never want it to be a crutch, but it can be a great tool, especially if you're preparing for a longer discussion or you're the moderator and your panelist. You've given them information in advance, but you also want them to be able to be thinking about the next question so the conversation's flowing really well. So, what I typically recommend is you want to have those cue cards in as small a space as possible. You don't want to bring a sheet of paper up there. That's really distracting and can honestly take away from the overall presence that you're trying to show of the fact that you're up there, you're prepared. If you're flipping through pages of notes, what that's potentially communicating to the audience is maybe you weren't prepared or that you're not looking as polished as you could be. So, what I do is I prepare my questions in advance, and then I actually have an Avery printable index card template, and I print my notes or questions onto those small index cards. So they're very easy to read since they're printed, and it looks very sleek if you wanted to do the same if you were the moderator and you had panelists to give them a printed cue card. Again, it's not taking up a lot of room, but it's very common practice to be able to bring your cue card on stage. The other call out with cue cards. Sometimes you'll be asked to speak at an event and they'll ask you to submit your questions in advance. And there might be an assumption that goes along with that of, okay, I gave them the questions in advance. They definitely gave them to all of my panelists, or they're definitely going to print them for me. I don't need to worry about it. And I can't stress this enough when it comes to speaking in general. Being prepared is the absolute key to success. So bring your cue cards printed with you. Make sure, and this is for me, if I'm moderating and I have panelists, I would also bring a copy to be able to give to my panelist. And then have an emergency backup. I usually also have my questions saved on my phone, just again as a backup. But at the end of the day, we never want cue cards to be a crutch. You never want to be white knuckle holding the cards, can't look away from them. Preparation is key. If you got into a situation where you spill coffee on the cue cards or whatever, you need to be able to go up there and confidently have that conversation without them, but they can be a great tool to help you feel confident and prepared during any speaking event.
I get images of Dumbo, when he loses his feather as he's, careening downwards and, his friend is saying, it's all in your head, you don't need the feather. So let's focus on the two types of talks that someone could find themselves asked to give. So let's a two-part question. I'll start with the first one. Can you share some tips on preparing for a talk where you're giving a presentation and you've got slides?
Yes. So before starting any presentation with slides or any presentation in general, I always recommend you do two things. First, start with the why. Why am I giving this talk and what's the goal of the talk? And then two, consider your audience. What do you want them to get out of the talk and how can you ensure that your message is clear? And that's going to help kind of get you in that frame of mind to where you're starting with the end in mind before making slides or anything else. My number one tip as you're getting ready to write your talk track or thinking about how do I want to start? Sometimes starting your presentation is the hardest part. Across all industries, people's attention spans are short, and studies today show that you have about 60 seconds to grab your audience attention. So start your presentation with a story, question, or a statistic that has a good hook to keep them interested. If you like TED Talks, they are a great place to go because they're notoriously good at having hooks at the beginning of their talks. If you want to get ideas, that can be a great place to go. Outside of thinking about where to start and ensure that we're gauging our audience at the very beginning, I could spend a whole hour talking on tips and tricks for slides, but I'll give just a few call outs. And Marnie, if we want to dig into any of these, we absolutely can. But overall, some of the core areas for slides is what to put on your slides. Be really focused on minimal text per slide. So 5 bullets or 30 words. You really want to focus on keywords or phrases instead of whole sentences. I actually like visuals such as a graph or chart as opposed to words, because the goal of every slide should be to support what you're saying. It should never have every word that you're going to say on there, or that your font is so small that your audience can't read it. So I would definitely recommend at minimum 20-point font, and also having high contrast text, so dark text on a white background. Because if you're going to put a slide in front of your audience, you really need to make sure that they can actually read it. The other piece to consider is how much time to spend on the slide. Typically, you want to spend 1 to 2 minutes on a slide. So for a 20-minute presentation, that's between 10 and 15 slides. And especially be thoughtful if you're planning to host Q&A at the end, that you're building that into how long your presentation is going to be. So kind of tips again, wrapping up as we think about presentation with slides. Whatever you do, do not just sit there and read the slides or have every note that you plan to address on the slide. You want to be speaking to your audience, not to your slides. And the tendency when people have slides is they can lose contact with their audience because they are either staring at the screen in front of them or they're craning their neck to the left or the right. And that's where practice really comes into place. But you really need to maintain eye contact with your audience, be looking across both sides of the room, and really focus on pacing when it comes to slides as well, especially if you're giving a talk with a limited amount of time. Make sure that you are practicing in advance, practicing advancing your slides, because that can be an area that trips people up. But the more that you can practice with your slides and get more comfortable not looking at the slides and really looking out at the audience and just using those slides as supplemental to the words that you're saying, the better for giving presentations with slides.
Kaylee, you competed in beauty pageants at a young age and was the first alternate for Miss Junior Mississippi and top 10 at Miss Mississippi Teen USA, which must have been quite an incredible experience with a ton of hard lessons learned and lots of hard work. Since my only experience with pageants is coming from watching Miss Congeniality with Sandra Bullock, can you share a little bit about how that experience helped you with your podium presence in your professional life?
Oh, absolutely. I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. And you see many of the elements displayed in that movie about some of the perceptions of pageants, right? The glittery dresses, the lipsticks, the crowns. But the preparation process is actually pretty intense. So, for instance, the interview portion, you sit before a panel of judges who can ask you anything. So, from personal experiences to current events, they can draw from anything. And you have to clearly communicate your perspective while maintaining a confident composure. And it's that interview preparation process that was really transformative for me. I spent countless hours answering tough questions, receiving constructive feedback, And you really also become acutely aware of your filler words. And you also learn the importance of posture, which we didn't talk about this earlier, but it's super important. How you carry yourself can significantly impact how confident and credible you appear to others. So it was those lessons in both learning how to effectively communicate and how to have a strong presence as you're going into a speaking situation that's really helped build my foundation to feel confident no matter the audience or speaking opportunity.
And so I'm excited about this. I'm hoping that this actually spins off into a series with you, because I think that there's enough meat here to really dig into, especially, some of these topics. So if you wanted to say, okay, listeners out there, if you want to up your game, and your podium presence, here are the next things you should do, what would that be?
Oh man, there's so many different ways that I could go with this, and so many things that we haven't even talked about today. But I'll boil it down into 4 areas. I would say first, especially if you're someone that is terrified at the thought of public speaking, that first, that's okay if that's you. Seek out feedback or mentorship. That's something that's been really impactful for me, is seeking feedback from others that are great speakers. And Marnie, I really appreciate you saying that you could feel my warmth and energy when I speak. And you've got to find others that you kind of desire to be when it comes to a speaker, and ask them for their feedback or their advice. So that would be the first element. Second is record yourself or give your presentation to friends or family. That's going to sound corny to some of you, but I'm very serious about it. Recording yourself allows you to see so many things, from hearing your vocal inflection. So are you talking monotone, or are you using that energy that gets people interested in what you're saying? It helps you notice things like mastering the pause, using that to draw people in. And it helps you also think about your body language. So if you're going to be giving a talk that you're very serious about, I highly recommend recording yourself and giving that talk to an audience to help you already get prepared with some of those things that can cause nerves. Third, I've mentioned it a few times, but I cannot say it enough. Practice, practice, practice. You don't need to procrastinate. You need to start early. And the more you can practice and the more comfortable that you can get with your material, the more prepared and confident and polished you're going to be when you walk up on that stage. The other tip when it comes to practice, we touched on shoes a little bit. For women especially, you need to be in a comfortable shoe, whether that's a flat or a heel, and you need to be practicing in that shoe, especially if it's a heel, so you can get comfortable shifting your weight and standing for an extended period of time in that shoe. And then final tip, especially if you're somebody that's wanting to improve or get better with their public speaking, is join a speaking group or take a class. There is a company called Toastmasters that I know does great work, and there are other public speaking workshops that can help you practice this skill. But it really is something that you just have to work on over time, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. And you can take each one of those wins, if you will, to look back on and take with you into your next speaking engagement. And ultimately, improving your podium presence and public speaking is a journey, and every opportunity to speak is a chance to both learn and grow.
Well, this has been absolutely phenomenal. Kaylee, thank you for taking time to share these amazing tips with our listeners about really upping your podium presence game. And for our listeners out there, if you'd like to learn more about Kaylee or the foundation she alluded to, Foundation for Physician Advancement, please check out her bio in the show notes. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you, Marnie. This has been a pleasure. It's something I'm really passionate about, which is helping people overcome their fear of public speaking. And I hope that we've provided some tangible next steps to support all of your listeners. This has been great.
Thanks for listening to Connect to Develop. You can find more interviews and Marnie's Minutes on my YouTube channel at Marney Reid Presents.